Let's move on and examine problem 9.3a, a variable overhead variance problem. Variable overhead variances very similar to labor variances in how they're laid out, and actually often very similar to labor variances because often variable overhead is driven by labor hours. Now, it's not in this question, but you'll often find that there's a real correlation. If you have a favorable labor variance, you often have a favorable overhead variance, and the reason is because they're based on the same thing, labor hours. But in this case, it's not. So maybe I'm jumping the gun there. Let's lay this out before we even get into reading it. AQAP, AQSP, and SQSP. Just like labor, we don't need separate prongs like we do for material. We just kind of have the prongs running together. Widgets or us applies variable overhead costs to jobs based on machine hours. So not based on labor hours, as I mentioned, but many do. And labor hours is perfectly fine to apply overhead to jobs based on. The company's predetermined variable overhead rate is $6 per machine hour. Okay, so we've got an hourly cost. It is estimated that each machine can produce 2 widgets per hour. Okay, so there we have it. For January, the company produced 600 widgets and machines were active for 320 machine hours. So this to me looks like an AQ number, right? Our actual quantity of hours worked, our actual quantity of machine hours worked is 320. The company's total variable overhead cost for the month was $1,400. Okay, so I think we've got enough to go on, at least enough to start. The machine hours, AQ, 320 hours. Our actual price per machine hour, we don't know, but we know we paid $1,400 in variable overhead, so we can kind of work backwards and figure out, okay, what was our rate here? And it was 1,400 divided by 320. It was 4.375 per hour. Now, our actual quantity, again, is 320. Had we paid our standard price, and our standard price was $6 per machine hour, it would have ended up costing 320 times 6, $1,920. A difference of $520. Now, we've got to say to ourselves, is this a good difference or a bad difference? And again, we highlight what is different before determining that. So 320, that's the same. We actually paid $4.40 per hour for per machine hour for overhead costs. We figured it was going to cost us $6 an hour. So this is good. We paid way less than what we would have figured. This is a favorable, and it's called an MOH, manufacturing overhead spending variance. Moving to our last prong. Our standard price remains $6 per hour. Our standard quantity. We answered the question. Given the actual number of units produced, how much overhead should have been used? How many hours of overhead would we have expected to have been used? Well, the company produced 600 widgets. Each machine makes 2 widgets an hour, so 600 divided by 2 means we would have figured this would have taken us 300 hours. That's what I would have figured. So 300 hours becomes our standard quantity allowed. $6 an hour is our, and these are machine hours in this case, not labor hours. 300 times 6 is $1,800. The difference here is 120. Now we got to say, is this difference good or bad? Well, let's compare what exactly is different. Our 6 and 6 are the same, but 320 versus 300, we actually took 320 machine hours. We should have taken 300. We used too much time. This is an unfavorable manufacturing overhead efficiency variance. So reasons for this. Okay, well, you need to think about what types of costs are overhead costs. These are all of our indirect factory costs. So maybe cleaning supplies or property tax. Well, that's a fixed factory cost. We're more interested in the variable overhead costs, but those indirect factory costs. And most often, the most often given reason here is just that we spent less on it. We maybe bargained for a good deal, or perhaps the price was lower than what we expected. But that's most often the case for MOH spending variances. For MOH efficiency variances, it's all about either machine hours or direct labor hours used, whatever our driver is for overhead. In this case, machine hours. So our machines didn't turn out the units as quickly as we could have expected. There may have been a machine breakdown. There may have been a machine working more inefficiently than we expected. Those are definite possibilities for reasons we may have had this unfavorable MOH efficiency variance. Okay, that's it for 9.3a, folks. Stay tuned for our next video.